No, butthead. The question is, why do you have a brain the size of a baby pea? Pea.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Mr. Pitiful podcast. I am your boss podcaster, Mr. Pitiful.
That's the man that gave me.
Coming at you live and direct, live from a vault at Fort Knox, wherever Fort Knox is. Welcome. If you are new to the Mr. Pitiful podcast, basically what I do on here is I just tell true stories about my life, and here we go. So today's episode, I want to talk about, I was on a show called The Wonder Years back in the late 80s, early 90s. Not talking about that woke Wonder Years reboot they tried to do recently that I think has already been canceled. I'm talking about the OG Wonder Years from back in the day. So first of all, as far as my background goes, I was pretty much a regular kid most of my life until the Wonder Years thing kind of fell into my lap. So you might be wondering, how did I even end up on the Wonder Years to begin with? Well, I never had aspirations to be an actor, for one thing. I did not have a crazy stage mother. Well, I had a crazy mother, but that's a whole other conversation. I did not go on auditions. I did not go on cattle calls. None of that stuff. It was pure nepotism, baby. So what happened? Well, long story short, my dad was an expert in vintage cars. Dude freaking knew everything there was to know about vintage cars. And the Wonder Years was based in the 60s, right? So we used to have this thing in LA called the Recycler. You know, back then everything was analog. Well, this was the analog version of Craigslist, if you will. So it was a paper that came out on Thursday mornings. People would run and get this paper, and there were like classified ads in there. And my dad didn't really have to work. We had a business that pretty much ran itself, so we didn't have to babysit the business or be around all the time. So my dad was just kind of bored and looking for something to do. And he come across this ad in the Recycler that was like, hey, we need people who are experts in vintage cars. My dad's like, hey, that's me. And it was supposed to be like a 3-day assignment. And basically what it was is this company rented vintage cars to film in TV studios. They had a bunch of storage facilities all over the place. And what they needed my dad for was they had lost their lease on one of the storage facilities and needed to move the cars to another one. But they needed somebody who was an expert in these cars because they have quirks and various, things. And they needed somebody with a level of expertise to assist in removing these cars. So my dad goes down there, pretty much blows them away with his knowledge and with his skills. And they said, hey, what do you do for a living? And he says, well, I'm basically retired, small business owner, They're like, come work for us full time. So they basically hire my dad on the spot as like a full-time employee. And they had a bunch of contracts with a bunch of different shows, but they stuck him on the Wonder Years account. So he comes home and he starts talking about working on the Wonder Years. And I was skeptical as soon as he told me because the Wonder Years had actually been canceled. They only did I want to say 3 episodes. And then there was a writer's strike that year, 88 I think was the year, and the show had stopped production. So I didn't realize there was a writer's strike. I thought the show was just off the air. So when he comes home talking about being on this show, I didn't even believe him. But he said, no, there was a writer's strike. It's over with. They're back in production. And I'm working on the show. So if you actually watch the first couple episodes of the Wonder Years, there are some subtle differences in the later episodes. Now, it's been 30 years, so if my memory is a little hazy, forgive me, but I do remember that the PE uniforms at the school were different slightly. The Arnold family car was different, if I recall. I believe even Winnie Cooper's parents were different people. And I know at least in the pilot episode, they had a different narrator. Later on, Daniel Stern, who you might know from Home Alone and movies like that, he ended up being the narrator. But in the first episode, it was a different voice at least. So my dad would come home after work and talk about all this cool stuff that happened on the set and all these cool things he was doing and all these cool things, all these cool people he was meeting. And I finally get up the gumption to be like, yo, this sounds interesting as fuck. Can I just come down to the set one day when you're shooting on location if there's no school I just want to see like how a movie's made. Now, to be fair, I'd sort of watched a movie being filmed years ago. I actually got to watch them film the OG Knight Rider back in the day, but I was really young and I just kind of forgot, and I just thought it would be like a cool experience to go down to the set and see how a movie was made. So one day they're filming at the Arnold family house, which was in Burbank, California, over on University Street, I guess. And I'm sitting out there watching them film, and the first thing that kind of struck me was that the actors looked a little different in person than I expected. You know, I was a big fan of the show. I watched the show. So I kind of had this expectation of what Fred Savage and Josh Saviano would look like, you know, Kevin Arnold and Paul Pfeiffer. But keep in mind, you know, they use these super high-end film cameras. They use lots of lights. They use lots of makeup. They use lots of angles. So generally, in my experience, most celebrities look a little different in person than you might expect. So I'm sitting there getting a kick out of watching them film this episode. But the casting agent happened to be right there, and her and my dad were friendly. And she took a liking to me because I was the right age and the right look for the show. And specifically, I had what they used to call the All-American Kid look, which for this show they really liked. The curious thing about the Wonder Years was it wasn't based in any particular location. If you watch the show carefully, sometimes you'll see California license plates, sometimes you'll see New York license plates. Kevin even wore like a New York Jets jacket off and on. So it wasn't really an East Coast or a West Coast show. It was kind of like this Anytown, USA, you know, some kind of cookie cutter suburban neighborhood kind of a thing. So it wasn't really East Coast or West Coast. It was like just America. I was the right age and the right look. They were like, hey, do you want to be on the show?
That's how they do. They got wooden balls, man.
So I can't even believe it. I basically just got cast to be on the Wonder Years, like one of the most popular shows of the era. So the first thing I had to do was go out and buy some wardrobe. They have their own wardrobe, obviously. They have these huge wardrobe cages full of these great like 60s clothes. But they expect you to bring your own wardrobe. And you might wear your wardrobe, you might wear their wardrobe. So I went out and bought a pair of Chuck Taylors, some black Chuck Taylors. And we went to the thrift stores and found a bunch of like 60s looking shirts. And the first episode I was in was the Peace Walkout. I want to say this was probably like season 2. But basically, the kids are protesting the Vietnam War, so they all walk out and have a protest. And I'm in that episode with like 100 other kids, so there's like zero chance to see me in the crowd. But I start going to school. You know, I was about 12 years old at the time, so like 7th grade. So I start like going to school telling everyone, hey guys, I'm on the Wonder Years. And I got like laughed out of the room. And even when I was filming other episodes, I would say like the first 1 or 2 episodes I was in, you don't see me at all. I either got cut out of the episode through the editing process, or I just wasn't filmed from a great angle, so there was zero chance to see me, or I was like blurry or something. So people basically thought I was like this huge liar. But then probably by like the 3rd episode that I was in, you could actually like see me in the background. And I think it aired on like Tuesday nights. I don't really remember, but I show up to school Wednesday morning and everybody is losing their shit. Oh my God, you really are on the Wonder Years. I saw you. You were behind Kevin Arnold, blah, blah, blah. So it originally started as me just being a background extra. So just in the background at the school, out on the street, on the school bus, you know, just pantomiming that I was doing something, and that's kind of how it started. Because I had that all-American kid look, though, I could pass myself off as some of the other cast. So eventually, I started doing photo double work and stand-in work for some of the other actors, specifically Michael Tricario. Hope I'm saying your name right, buddy, if you're listening. But I often was a photo double for him, and oftentimes I would also be like, you know, like Winnie Cooper's boyfriend or something, you know, but they shoot like from the back. So Michael Tricario played Randy Mitchell, who was like one of Kevin's buddies, but he wasn't like necessarily in every episode or something like that. But what a stand-in is basically they don't want to use the main actors in the context of like focusing cameras, focusing lights, stuff like that. So they find somebody who's a reasonable facsimile of the actor to basically stand on a small piece of tape on the floor, and they set up the camera angles, they set up the lights, they set up everything, and then when they're satisfied with the way everything looks, you step away and the actor steps into your place and they go ahead and do the take. Now, a photo double is kind of similar, except you actually are on camera, but basically what happens is if, like, let's say it's like somebody like Tom Cruise, right? But they're shooting the back of the head. They're not going to bring Tom Cruise on the set and waste his time to shoot the back of his head. They're going to find somebody who looks exactly like Tom Cruise from behind and shoot from the back, and that person will pantomime the lines and whatever, so they don't have to waste the actor's time. So I did a lot of stand-in work and a lot of photo double work for some of the sort of ancillary characters. A couple times I was even like Winnie Cooper's boyfriend or something, which was kind of cool. Also, they started using my hands for a lot of stuff. I had pretty nice looking hands at the time. My nails were well taken care of. I didn't bite them or anything. My cuticles were squared away. So if they needed to do a close-up on somebody's hands or something like that, they would use my hands oftentimes. Now, one of the ones that was embarrassing for me was they had asked me to do some, close-up work with my hands, but they wanted me to write, like with a pen. And my penmanship is about the worst you could possibly imagine. And I forget exactly what the episode was. I think Kevin Arnold was signing a birthday card or somebody's yearbook or something. So they had to put me at this like super weird angle to begin with because of the cameras and the lights and everything. So I'm not even in like a natural sitting position. And they did like 4 or 5 takes of me writing like in this yearbook, and it just looked like abject shit. And I was super embarrassed about that. That's basically what I did for about 4 years on the show, was about, I would say, 80% background extra, 10% stand-in, and maybe like 10% photo double and like hand model. Additionally, I did speak in one episode, which made me eligible for a SAG card, which is like the holy grail for actors and starving extras, if you will. But I spoke in the episode, gosh, what was it, season 4 maybe? The episode was called Goodbye, and it was when Kevin's math teacher dies. And I answer a simple 3-word math question at the beginning of the episode. I'm in the ugliest green paisley shirt you could possibly imagine. The prop master was being cheeky and put me in some big Coke bottle freaking Buddy Holly glasses for that one. So it changed my life. The whole experience left an indelible impression on me and steered the course for the rest of my life. So let me talk about maybe what a typical day for me looked like. So first of all, I had to get up at like the butt crack of dawn, which I hated. Every time that alarm went off at like 4 a.m. or 5 a.m., like a part of my soul would just die. It's cold out oftentimes, it's pitch dark, and I'm just not much of a morning person. So I would drag my happy ass out of bed, take a shower. Now, if my dad was also on the call and had to do cars, especially if the cars belonged to us, I had to get up early and help him load the cars on the transporter at like 6 in the morning. I freaking hated that and was trying not to get dirty because I'd already had a shower. And I didn't want to show up to hair and makeup, with grease all over me. So we would then fight traffic into LA, depending on where we were shooting. We were living in the San Gabriel Valley at the time. Our soundstage was in Culver City. A lot of our on-location stuff was like in Burbank. Sometimes we'd have to go as far as like Santa Monica, for instance. So it was like a long car ride in. Oftentimes I would try to get some sleep in the car on the way to the set. The first thing I would do when I got on the set was to go to wardrobe. And like I said, I had my own wardrobe. They had their wardrobe, and they would pick out something for me to wear that day. So I would get outfitted with my wardrobe was my first duty of the day. Next, I would go over to hair and makeup, and you had to keep a 60s style haircut back then. You couldn't have a modern day haircut. So usually I would just go over there and they would just run a comb through my hair and call it good. By the end of my career, my skin was so bad, they actually started using makeup on me, which was bloody embarrassing. But after doing my hair and makeup, I would have to go back to the wardrobe department and have pictures taken. Now, back then, there were no digital cameras, so we used Polaroids for everything. So once I was in my wardrobe and my hair and makeup, the wardrobe department would take pictures of me to use later for continuity purposes. So if they had to reshoot the scene, or if they had to do any pickup shots or something like that, we could look the same so that the continuity was congruent. So once that was all squared away, then it was breakfast time. And movie sets have the most fire freaking food. So most mornings I would eat a big old fatty breakfast burrito, 2 donuts, and a bagel and a thing of orange juice. And all the stage mothers sitting there watching me put all that food away, they wanted to freaking murder me. Because I was all of like probably 80 pounds back then. And I never gained a pound. So I would load up on all this great food, and then it was school time. Now, when you're a minor and a child actor, you have to go to 3 hours of school per day on the set, which in my mind was great because I hated going to school. I was not a big school person. Because I hated school and I wasn't like a big academic or anything, I would mostly just sit around and read a book. And the extras, we didn't really have like proper teachers. They were kind of more like social workers that just kept an eye on us, but they did log our time in school and stuff like that. The actual principal actors like Fred and Josh and Danica, they all had like proper teachers, and they were taking like computer programming classes and stuff. And I would basically just bring a book to the set and act like my homework was done, and the social workers never questioned it. So I would just sit there and read books all day, which later came back to haunt me, and I'll talk about that here in a second. But there was a lot of, what do we call it? Hurry up and wait. There was a lot of sitting around. And at the end of the day, I would actually go home pretty tired just because you sat around eating food all day, because it takes a long time to set up a shot. They usually don't need you until the shot is reasonably set up. So we would sit around, do our 3 hours of school, and they'd call us onto the set. We would do the shots, and then we'd go and sit around some more until they had set up the next shot. So as a child actor, as somebody under 18, you're not allowed to work not 1 second over 8 hours. So literally, if I had an 8 a.m. call time, at 5 p.m. on the dot, we were cut pretty much no matter what. I seem to recall one time the production just begging the social workers to let us stay like 20 minutes after. And that was like a huge deal. Like that had never happened before, but they were super behind for some reason. And the social workers were kind of like, okay, it's just 20 minutes, but they're pretty strict about that stuff. So it's pretty much an 8-hour day. And then you go home. And back then I was making $50 a day before taxes, which for a kid who's like 12 in the 80s, like that was pretty good money. That was probably a little better than minimum wage, but keep in mind, I'm not really doing much. I'm just getting to be on TV and sitting around eating free food all day. So that was kind of my deal. Now, keep in mind though, even though I was only allowed to work 8 hours, there were times when I was kind of piggybacking on my dad's call too, because my dad did these vintage cars for the show. And sometimes he might work like a 20-hour shift, and I'm not even making that up. The hours people keep on movie sets is crazy. And if you walk around and kind of look at the crew, everybody looks haggard, everybody looks tired. It's a very, very tough life and a very tough job. Yeah, you make good money. Pretty much all the dudes drove brand new Corvettes or Mustangs or Camaros or something like that. But it's a super, super tough grind. And because my dad was basically in the transportation department, we were oftentimes the first people to arrive and the last people to leave. So even if my call time wasn't until 8 or 9 a.m., my dad's might be like 6 a.m. So we'd show up at 6 a.m., unload the cars, and then I've got all this downtime until I need to be prepped and ready to go on camera. And even after I got off, after my little 8-hour shift, I might be there till like freaking midnight. And then I'm helping my dad load the cars, and we're dragging them back to wherever we had to take them to. So suffice it to say, I spent an inordinate amount of time on this set. And when you do that, a couple things happen. One is the cast and crew kind of become like your second little family, especially the crew, because you interact with them way more. So I got really friendly with like the cinematographers, the sound guys, the grips, the lighting guys, the electricians. And because I had so much time on the set, I started learning a lot because I was curious. Like, hey, why do you do this with the camera? Hey, what is that little thing you do with the sound? Or why is this different than this? And blah, blah, blah. And these guys were all super patient and answered my questions. And in a funny way, this eventually led to me becoming a music professional and an audio engineer later in life. So you become supremely close with these people. They basically become like your second family because you see them like nonstop, like every day. Let's talk about the cast a little bit. So Fred Savage, who played Kevin Arnold, super fun kid, super cheeky. He always kind of had like a funny joke or a little thing to say. And, he always had a good attitude about everything. And I really liked Fred, and I got to know him a little bit over the years, and I got to know his mom. Josh Saviano, who played Paul Pfeiffer, and no, he is not Marilyn Manson now. He was just kind of a normal kid. I wouldn't say he really ran hot or cold. He didn't really even like stick out much. He was just kind of a regular, just kind of average guy. Danica McKellar, who played Winnie Cooper. So the number one question I used to get when I was a child actor was, "Did you meet Winnie Cooper? Is Winnie Cooper hot?" Yeah, I freaking met Winnie Cooper. In fact, again, I was like her boyfriend a few times as a photo double or a stand-in in quite a few of these episodes. So yes, I met Winnie. The funny thing, though, about her was it seemed to me that her mom didn't really like her fraternizing with the rest of the cast and crew. And this was just my perception, but it seemed like when they got on the set, they went like straight to the dressing room or straight to the trailer. And to be fair, some of that could have just been because they were behind on school and had to catch up on schoolwork. So it may not have been like a, don't fraternize with the peasants type situation. But she was one that I didn't get to know quite as well, just because it seemed like she was always in her dressing room or always in her trailer. But Fred and Josh, they were around quite a bit. In fact, on the soundstage in Culver City, we had a basketball court. And at lunch, the big thing for all of us to do was to go play a pickup game of basketball. And it was like the cast and crew all playing together. So here's a bunch of like 12 and 13-year-olds playing against a bunch of grown men. And sometimes it would get pretty competitive. I remember a few times, like one of our sound guys, he was a big man. He was like 200 pounds, probably could have been a football player or something. And like he'd body check me and almost knock me to the ground, but then he'd catch me before I actually did hit the ground, something like that. So it was like a lot of fun to grow up this way. And it certainly beat going to school because once again, I hated school. Now, Jason Hervey, who played Wayne, I got to know him a little bit, and he was a super cool, friendly guy. The thing that I felt kind of bad for him about was that there's some people out there in the audience who don't understand that these are actors. They are playing a character, they are acting. And I guess when people would see him out on the street or in the store or something, they'd come up and start like lambasting him, like, "Oh, you're a jerk," and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, "Come on, man, I'm a freaking actor." So I always thought that was kind of interesting. I didn't really get to know Olivia Diabo all that well. She played Karen, which was Kevin's older sister. What blew my head off, though, the first time I spoke with her is that she's actually British. And she has a very posh, I don't know the word, like London, Victorian accent, whatever, but she has a super fancy English accent, but she does an American accent so well, you'd never know in a million years she was British. So the first time I heard her speak, like in her actual voice, like the top of my head blew off. I couldn't even believe it. But I was very rarely in scenes that she would be in because I was mostly like in the school or on the school bus or out on the street in front of the Arnold family house. So Never got to interact with her too much. I got to interact with the parents a little bit. Dan Loria, who played Kevin's dad, Allie Mills, who played Kevin's mom, got to interact with them a little bit. Never really got to know them, but I found Dan to be an actually pretty friendly guy, despite the fact he was kind of a big, scary dude, and he kind of played a big, scary dude on the show. Now, another thing to kind of keep in mind about the Wonder Years, and a lot of people forget this, is how many famous people were actually on the show, or how many people became famous later in life from being on the show. So a good example would be like Alicia Silverstone. She was one of Kevin's love interests in the early episodes. Later, I worked with her on an Aerosmith video, and she blew up and became super, super famous. And like a year or two later, she was in Clueless, and it just went crazy from there. Ben Savage was on the show, who later went on to do Boy Meets World. What was his name? Robin Thicke was on the show. He was one of Winnie's love interests. Juliette Lewis was on the show. She was Wayne's girlfriend. David Schwimmer was Karen's husband in the later episodes. So there was a lot of talent kicking about. And I seem to remember, again, it's been 30 years, so forgive me if my memory's shot, but I seem to remember the guy who was on Growing Pains. Jeremy Miller was actually dating Danica McKellar in real life. So I seem to recall him being on the set one day with like a dozen roses to visit her. So you never knew like who you were going to see or what you were going to see. I'm trying to think who else was on the show. The guy who played Coach Cutlip, gosh, what was his name? He was also on China Beach, which I never watched and was never super interested in. Also, what was kind of cool is we had animal wranglers from time to time, mostly for dogs and things that were going to be on the show. But I remember one time they brought a chimpanzee by the set, which was like pretty freaking cool. I'd never seen a chimpanzee before. So all in all, it was a good experience. You know, for the most part, I did it for 4 years, but there were some downsides. One of the biggest downsides to being on a show like that and having everybody know about it is all the sycophantic people come out of the woodwork. So all of a sudden, everybody's your buddy, everybody's your friend. And, oh, hey, by the way, can you introduce me to your agent? Oh, by the way, can you get me on the show? One of the best ones was they were filming actually out in my area at the Eastland Mall for the Cutlip Christmas episode, where they find out that their PE teacher moonlights as like a mall Santa. And all the girls, all the snotty girls from my high school were there. I was probably like a freshman at this point. All the snotty girls who treated me like crap in high school all had their name and phone number written on a piece of paper and were like, "Can you give this to Fred Savage for me? Hee hee." And I was like, piss off. So everybody becomes your fair weather friend when you're fame adjacent, which I was. And out of all the years I did this, I only ever got 2 people on the show. I got my cousin on the show, and I don't think she lasted more than 1 episode. I can't recall if she didn't like doing it or the production didn't want her back. But I got her on the show like once, and then I got a couple of my friends on the basketball episode. I think it was when where Paul Pfeiffer tries out for the basketball team, and there was just a huge cattle call where they brought like 100 people in and just gave them free t-shirts or something. And I got them on the show because they were actually good friends of mine that, you know, liked me before I was on the show kind of thing. So, but apart from that, there was no way I would ever recommend anybody to be on the show. So that was one downside was to being on the show was the sycophants that come out. The other thing I hated was signing autographs. And I know it doesn't sound like a big deal. You're just writing your name down on a piece of paper, but it gets freaking old. And the thing I think that really bothered me about it was I wasn't even famous. Like I was just some kid. I was in the background. And maybe people were speculating that I was going to be famous someday, or maybe they just thought it was cool I was on the show and just wanted my autograph for fun. But after you sign a couple, it does get annoying. It doesn't really bother me when like celebrities get snippy about signing autographs because it is annoying as hell. So for you normies out there that want people to sign autographs, just don't. Okay. The hours sucked. So even though I could only work 8 hours, I still had to get up hella early, which I hated. And then again, if I was like piggybacking on my dad's gig, you know, I might be on the set 18 or 20 hours. And that sucked. Now, if you're passionate about making movies, it may not be so bad to work those kinds of hours. I was never passionate about movies. In fact, not only was I more interested in music, but I got to a point where I was kind of bored with the whole thing. And I started just kind of mailing it in and going through the motions, which as an adult, I regret. I wish I would have realized a little more what I had back then. And I wish I would have taken it a little more seriously or been a little more appreciative of it. But I was kind of a spoiled kid. And, I did kind of take it for granted back then. It came a little too easily to me, I think. I didn't really have to work for it. And looking back, I wish I had maybe been a little more serious about it, but it is what it is. Another downside to working on movie sets is that movie sets are supremely dangerous places. There's lots of equipment, lots of trucks, lots of people, lots of high voltage and electricity. There's a lot that can go wrong, and trust me, a lot did. One of the big things specifically with my dad's department is we dealt with these old vintage cars. And a lot of times what happens with what are called picture cars is they might look good on the outside because that's all they need them for. They just need them to look good. Oftentimes underneath mechanically, these things are a train wreck. The brakes barely work. The transmissions are all old and worn out. You never know what could happen. So my dad warned me constantly about being around these cars and what could happen. And a few small things happened on our end, but let me share one story with you that was supremely scary, and thank God nobody got hurt. There was the episode with Denise the Grease. Kevin meets this hot girl in a poetry class, and she has some big jabroni boyfriend who's got like a old Chevelle or a Camaro or something. And this car looked dope as hell. I mean, it was red with the white racing stripes and had the SS logo and all that. I was big into muscle cars back then. So this was like my dream car, but mechanically underneath, this thing was a basket case. And the opening scene was the car would drive right up to the camera and stop, and they would do what was called a single, which meant it was like a tight camera shot. They were doing a single on the SS logo and the grill of this car. So they start doing the shoot, and the stunt driver, drives up and hits the brakes, and they do this like 3 or 4 times, but after a couple takes, the brakes had heated up. And by like the 5th take, the stunt driver slams on the brakes and the car don't stop. And the car slams right into the camera dolly. Now, I don't recall the camera getting damaged. These are like $100,000 film cameras that you can't even buy. You have to rent them from Panavision. But I remember the cinematographer kind of had his legs wrapped around the gooseneck of the dolly. And when he saw the car wasn't going to stop, thank God, he like threw his legs to the side and the car sort of hit the gooseneck and kind of slammed the dolly backwards. But that was a super close call. Nobody got hurt, but the camera guy was hella shook up. So they actually gave him like 2 or 3 days off just to compose himself. So crisis averted there. One of the most dangerous episodes I personally worked on was the baseball episode. So the kind of setup was that like Kevin tries out for the baseball team and a bunch of stuff happens, but they had us in these period correct baseball uniforms, which involved metal cleats instead of like the plastic or the rubber cleats they have today. These were old baseball shoes with like metal cleats. And a lot of people got injured with these cleats. Like we'd accidentally step on one another. I think the crew was calling it spiking or something. A couple people got spiked by accident, but believe it or not, Danica McKellar, who played Winnie Cooper, accidentally got spiked. I want to say, I'm trying to remember now. Again, guys, it's been 30 years. I apologize, but I want to say Fred accidentally like stepped on her leg and like cut her shin open pretty badly. And we had an on-set medic, so everything was fine. They were able to patch her up and all of that. But I remember her being pretty upset about that. And I remember Fred just felt absolutely terrible. But one of kind of the funnier things that happened was on that episode, they had hired a professional Little League baseball team to assist us with the shoot. So they dressed these guys up like the baseball team, and they, had us helping us with the shoot. Well, one day they called us in to do pickup shots of just us like chasing after balls and stuff like that. And off camera, they had one of the Little League guys hitting baseballs towards us off of a tee, like a tee-ball setup. So he'd crack the bat, hit these baseballs towards us, and we were supposed to chase them on camera. And I had this buddy, I'm not going to name him because he went on to do some other stuff, and he's maybe got a little bit of notoriety out there, and he's got a very unique name, but he was kind of a magnet for stuff like this. He was getting hurt constantly, and I'm surprised the production even had him back after a while because he was such a liability. But the funny thing is, one of the pickup shots, the Little League dude hits the baseball off the thing and hits my buddy like in the lower abdomen. I mean, probably missed his nuts by like 2 or 3 inches. And I just remember watching the ball fly and watching my buddy just hit the ground and going like, oh crap. And he pulled his shorts down later and kind of showed me the welt he had, and it was super gnarly. I mean, he was like red and pink and purple, and it was like round like the size of a baseball. Like if that would have hit him in the nards, like he probably would not be having kids today. But the even funnier thing was he kind of had a reputation for this at some point, so it had almost become like a running joke on the set. And I remember one day one of the assistant directors pulled me aside and goes, hey, bro, I was watching the dailies this morning and I watched, so-and-so get hit with the baseball. I go, yeah, what was that like? He goes, bro, he just drops. And we didn't mean to laugh about it, but it was kind of funny. But with so many moving parts, anything can happen on the set. And it does. I've seen quite a few people get injured on the set. One episode we did was a square dancing episode. And they actually paid us to come in for like 2 or 3 days and work with a professional square dancing coach. And they taught us how to square dance. And the episode was Kevin had to square dance with like the ugly girl or the nerdy girl in school. And we were shooting in a gymnasium in Burbank, like an actual gymnasium. And it was like the beginning of summer, and it was kind of a freak like heat wave that week. And it was super hot in the gym. And next thing you know, kids that I was working with started getting like nosebleeds and heat stroke and started dropping like flies. And the social workers went to the production and said, yo, fix this now or we're shutting down this shoot, which they had all the power in the world to do. And within an hour, they had these huge like industrial grade air conditioners they were wheeling in, and they had these big like yellow hoses that were blasting all the cold air in. And they cooled that gym off quicker than you've ever seen. So it's a hard life behind the scenes, harder than, the final product might let on. One of the things that specifically happened to me was Josh Saviano, Paul Pfeiffer, his mom bought him a dog, like a little puppy. And his name was Ollie, and he was the sweetest little wriggly little puppy you ever saw. And one day I was in Josh's dressing room, and Ollie was on my lap, and I was kind of playing with him. And he jumped up and bit my ear and basically ripped my ear open. And he had those little needle teeth, and he wasn't doing it to be mean or vicious or malicious. He just was a little puppy, and he had that puppy energy. And Ollie latched onto my ear and basically ripped my earlobe open, and I bled out all over the place, all over my wardrobe. And the production was mad at me for this. And they're like, yo, you shouldn't have had your face in the dog's face. And I'm like, I didn't have my face in the dog's face. The dog was on my lap, jumped up and latched onto my ear and freaking ripped my ear open. And they were mad at me for that. So, anything can happen. Now, when I finally got a speaking line on the show, it changed my life forever, even though it was a very small part that I didn't even really get proper credit for. But what had happened was one day one of the producers came in and he rounded all the kids up and put us at this big long table and just had like a 30-second conversation with all of us. He just went around the table and was like, ba ba ba, ba ba ba. So we all went around the table and we kind of knew what was going on. It was that they were doing like a last minute casting for something. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to me, my dad went to his boss, who was like the transportation captain, and was like, hey, my kid's been on the show for years. Can you just like get him a speaking line somehow? Can you just talk to the right people, pull the right strings? And the guy was like, yeah, sure, no problem. So I get pulled aside later with my friend, who I'd been working with for some years, and we both get told that we both got speaking lines. So I am like, over the moon. Like, yes, I finally get to speak on camera, finally get my moment in the sun, finally get my SAG card. Like, this is just the beginning of the rest of my life. So I was beyond proud of myself. So I go running to my dad, who's on the set, and I'm like, hey, I got a freaking speaking line. And my dad's like, yeah, I know, dude. I made that happen. I, went and talked to my boss. So now I'm all bummed out because I'm thinking like I didn't get this on my own meritocracy. It was another example of nepotism. So I was actually kind of pissed, and it kind of ruined it for me. So my dad, now knowing that I got this speaking line, went into his boss's office to thank him for getting me the part. And his boss is like, I didn't have anything to do with that. In fact, I haven't left the office all day. I've been doing, payroll or paperwork all morning or something. So the kid got it on its own. So my dad later came and told me, like, by the way, you got this part on your own. So like I said, I answered a math question in the goodbye episode. The amount of money I made from doing this was just crazy. So when you're a background extra or a stand-in, you only make like $50 a day. And then when they take out taxes, especially in California back then, I think I would net like $43, something like that. When you speak on camera with a actual SAG, designation, now I'm making $415 a day for my little 8-hour shift. And it doesn't matter if you're there an hour or there all 8 hours, you get paid the same rate. So they had to shoot my part over 2 days because they shot it from the front and then they shot it from the back. So I got my little $415 rate for 2 days to do this shoot, which was just crazy. And keep in mind, this is a crazy amount of money for like, at this point, I think it was about 1992. So I was, 13, 14. But that was a crazy amount of money for the time and for a kid my age. And the other thing that some of you may not realize is there's also what are called residuals. Every time they aired that episode on ABC, which was the main, affiliate, I would get a check for something crazy like $900 just for them running the episode. Now, when the episode goes into syndication and is shown on other networks, it's significantly less. So I think the first couple residual checks I got were for like $900 a pop. Then I think they started showing it on Fox or something, and I think I would get like $300, $350, something like that. I think the smallest check I ever got was for 33 cents. They had showed it in Thailand a bunch of times, and apparently people in Thailand don't watch the show, or I don't really know how all that works, but I don't even think I bothered depositing the check for 33 cents. I probably just tossed it in the trash. But the crazy thing about the Wonder Years was they never officially released it on DVD like forever because the music licensing cost too much. They used the actual songs from Joe Cocker, the Beatles, the Grateful Dead, Janis Joplin, whatever. And it captured the zeitgeist of the era. So it only made sense to use, these actual songs. But when it came down to releasing it on VHS or DVD, they couldn't really afford to do it. So from my understanding anyway, if you did manage to get one of these old DVDs, they're bootlegs because as far as I can tell, they were never officially released. Now, I didn't get residuals for years and years. And there was a time after the show was over, I almost kind of like forgot I was even on the show because it wasn't on TV anymore. It never really came up in my personal life. And once in a while I would think about it, but for the most part, it had almost been wiped from my mind. And then like once in a while I'd get a check and be like, oh yeah, well, I started getting checks recently when the Wonder Years came back out on Netflix. The checks were only from like $40 to $75, but it's still kind of cool that I'm making money from something I did like over 30 years ago. But my understanding with the Netflix releases is in order to get around the music licensing thing, they've basically replaced the music with either stuff that's like sound alike or just some random song that they had clearance to use, which for me kind of kills the spirit of the show because the whole point of the show is it's like the 1960s. So you need that 1960s music from Creedence or, whoever. And just by putting a bunch of generic music in there, I felt like that wasn't the right thing to do. But at least I'm happy I'm getting residuals now. So that's kind of cool. So the last thing I want to talk about is other opportunities that being on the Wonder Years afforded me. Obviously, my time on the set got me interested in the technology. I was interested in lights and sound and cameras and stuff. So eventually I went through the Full Sail program and became an audio engineer. But from an acting standpoint, see, shows back then had seasons. This was before like reality TV and stuff was just on all the time. So we'd shoot for a few months and then we had what was called hiatus, where we'd take a break and some people would just take vacation, but usually people would work on other productions. So I remember, I think it was the first Wonder Years hiatus ever. I get a call from my agent and she goes, hey, I've got a movie I want you to be in. It's called The Wizard and Fred Savage is in it. So I was like, cool. The Wizard was a movie about Fred Savage's little brother is like a video game expert, hence The Wizard. and they go to California to like compete in a video game contest. Well, I got to be an extra in that, which was super cool. I'll probably do a whole episode on that. But I knew like 75% probably of the crew and quite a few of the people that were acting in it too. And one of my buddies actually got a speaking line in that, which was super cool. And I got to see Super Mario 3 before it was released to the public, which was pretty cool too. And the crazy thing was, because this wasn't a vintage piece, my dad didn't have anything to do with the cars because they just used modern cars for this. So he was just sitting around on the set as my guardian. He got cast as a security guard. He got more freaking screen time than me in this movie, which is just crazy. Also, I was in a production through Disney. I forget how I got this one because this didn't have anything to do with my agent that I can recall. I don't recall knowing anybody on the set at all. No actors, no crew, no nothing. But I was in this thing called Cranium Command, which eventually ran at Epcot Center for like a good 10 or 15 years. And I actually went down there to see that, and it was pretty cool. And Disney pays really well, by the way. So I should probably do a video on that, too, because that was a really fun shoot. I was also in a Nike commercial. Got completely edited out of that one. But I got to spend the day hanging out in Santa Monica Beach for that one. I was also in a made-for-TV movie with Morgan Fairchild, who I always thought was kind of a babe. Pretty much got edited out of that one as well. I was supposed to be in Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead. And the reason I wasn't in that one, I mentioned earlier how much I hated school. Well, every 6 months you have to have the school renew your entertainment work permit for you. And because my grades had gotten so bad, I could not renew my work permit. So when my agent called and said, hey, do you want to be in this movie with Christina Applegate, who I was absolutely in love with at the time, I couldn't because I did not have a work permit. And I was beyond pissed off about that one. But I will say, in the 4 years that I did the Wonder Years, I might possibly be one of the longest running or most prolific background extras on that show. It's really hard to say because there was a lot of people that were there before me and a lot of people that were there after me, but a lot of times I just didn't see them very often. Like I'd see them here and there and then they would be gone, then I'd see them again. And then my thing was, because I lost my work permit, I missed quite a few episodes too, so I'm not trying to act like I was in every single episode for 4 years, but I was in quite a few of them. And if there was a way to tally up who had the most calls on that show, I would probably be in the top 10, if not the top 3. I was easy to work with, they liked me, and I was, a good fit for the show, so I got to work quite a bit. It's interesting to think how different my life would be if I hadn't lost my work permit and got to carry through working not only on the Wonder Years, but Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead, and maybe, some other productions as well that probably slipped by me because I didn't have a work permit. So kids, stay in school. So that's pretty much it. That's my experience working in film and television, being on the Wonder Years. If you have any questions, put them in the comments. I will try to answer them. If you're new to the channel, please like, comment, and subscribe. And tune in again to the Mr. Pitiful podcast. I'm your boss podcaster, Mr. Pitiful, signing off.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing technical difficulties. Please stand by.